It is my distinct pleasure to introduce two paragons. They are the legendary founders who not only envisioned the possibilities that the supply chain foretold, but also built the very infrastructure of what we know as logistics today. They remain ahead of the ongoing dramatic transformation of their respective industries. Please help me welcome Fred Smith, founder and executive chairman of FedEx, and Prologis' very own Hamid Moghadam, co-founder, chairman, and CEO, in conversation with Susie Garib, anchor and senior special correspondent for Fortune.
Most entrepreneurs get focused on something and they believe in the idea or themselves.
All of a sudden you turn the kaleidoscope and there you see something that nobody saw before.
I was willing to take a chance.
First, there was Vietnam. 2 combat tours, a Silver Star, Bronze Star, and 2 Purple Hearts.
Find yourself something you're good at and do it to perfection.
Embracing change is a very important part of Prologis' culture.
I think AI is a big, fast-moving train, and you better get on it or you're going to get run over by it. Don't be afraid to take chances on new things. You got to make clarity out of chaos.
Fred, Hamid, just great to see both of you. You know, what an amazing video. I mean, all I can say is wow. Mm-hmm. You know, this conference is about groundbreakers, and you two are amazing groundbreakers. You started Federal Express 50 years ago, and it's still going strong. Hamid, you started Prologis 40 years ago. Both of your companies are ranked so high on the S&P 500. So, you know, there are so many companies, entrepreneurs that start and their companies just don't make it. What is it? Can you pinpoint a principle or something that kept your company going for 50 years and is still going strong? And I'm going to ask you start thinking of your answer to that, but what would you say it was? You could keep your long-term vision. This is what I want to get across. You kept your long-term vision, but you adapted along the way to short-term market shifts.
Well, I think I've always been struck by the fact that if you go back and read history, like Marcus Aurelius, which everybody knows.
We're going way back in history, yeah. Okay.
One of the most important points that he made 2,000 years ago is the only thing constant in life is change. And we think of those periods of time as pretty static. So the most important thing I think that we did, first of all, we tapped into a significant market, which was the movement of goods for the high-tech and high-value-added society that was emerging. Because the old logistics was push, cut down trees, make them into 2x4s, the contractor comes and buys the equipment, the lumber. When you automate things, it turns that on its head. It's demand pull. Because if you don't have the equipment operating, you're out of business, whether it was an IBM 360 computer or whatever. So we had a base business that was very powerful, but it changed over time, and we had to change with it. And I think the mantra we always used was, if you don't like change, you're going to hate extinction. Somebody said that. So we built into the company early on the recognition, don't get comfortable, don't get static, you're going to have to change, either because of outside issues or whatever the case may be. That's the biggest single point right there, was we were willing to change and adapt to what the changing circumstances.
Don't get too comfortable. I mean, yeah. What's your story on how you've kept the vision of Prologis going and with all the changes that's going on with logistics?
There are a couple of things that really resonated with what Fred mentioned in his introduction. Certainly, we were in a business where, at least initially, there was no need for innovation. We were in the oldest industry in humanity. Fred had a brilliant idea about this company that he started. That industry didn't exist. Our industry had existed since the beginning of time. So what was our secret sauce was also the same thing, which is the ability to change over time. And I got to tell you, there are a lot of leaders I know who are very good at actually identifying the need to change. But I don't know too many people who have the courage to actually change, because change comes with risk. People grow in organizations based on their expertise. Change disrupts all of that, and it makes it much more difficult to adjust and course correct. So I would say we have pivoted a couple of times in a very significant way, but at the end of the day, the destination has always been clear. It's been putting the customer at the center of the business, which sounds like such a simple idea, but real estate has never been about the customer. It's always been about the next deal. And just like the big idea that Fred talked about with respect to FedEx, I think if there is one big idea for Prologis, that's the one.
So let's see if we can pinpoint that a little bit on the leadership technique, because you're talking about change and innovation. Can you give us a pivotal moment where you want to champion a big change, a big innovation? What did you have to do to get your team to buy into that? What is the leadership trick that you did?
Well, as I said a moment ago, the most important thing is to drum into everybody's head at every possible occasion that get ready for change. What we're doing today is not going to be what we're going to be doing 5 years from now. We're not going to be doing it in the same way, particularly with the technological changes that we've lived through. And that's the basic. You have to have the base. And you have to have the willingness to expend the leadership effort in the service business, because you're dependent on those first line employees or team members, as we call them. And you have to, people are not like they were 50 years ago. You have to not only tell them what you want them to do, but you got to tell them why you want to do it and what it means for them. And that exhausts a lot of people, and they don't want to take the time and effort to do it. So we coined a little phrase. It came from my days in the service, PSP, People Service Profit. If you take care of your frontline folks and you give the product, service in our case, we didn't make anything, then the numbers will take care of themselves. But you have to have that bedrock of acceptance of change, or you'll never be able to do it. You'll get the resistance and just be stuck, or worse, you'll have the equivalent of a mutiny, and they won't execute. So it's very, very important, again, to set the base that don't get comfortable. And I have one son who's a football coach. He tells his players that all the time. Don't get comfortable, because what we did last week is not going to work next week. So you've got to prepare the team members for change. And if they can't or won't accept change, they can't play on your team. They just can't, because it's coming.
So you let them go. You don't keep people like that at FedEx.
Yeah, you know, anybody that can't accept the necessary change is going to be the agent of your destruction. Now, if you need to make the change, obviously you don't want to humiliate people. You want to do it in the proper manner, but you have to be very, very strict about execution once a change has to be made, because it's catastrophic. And so many companies that were great. One of my favorite, obviously, is Netflix. I mean, there was Netflix. They were putting VHSs through the mail, and they realized this wasn't going to last. Well, that's one of the great changes in business history, and now it's an enormously successful business. So you have to be able to get your team to embrace the change and then execute on it. And if they can or they won't, They're part of the problem, not part of the solution.
I mean, I'm sure you've got lots of examples that you can give, but can you pinpoint one case where you wanted to make a major change at Prologis and it took some selling, or what did you do to get it to happen?
Yeah, actually, I can think of two, but I'll give you an example of the most recent one. About 4 or 5 years ago, we realized that we only served about 3 to 4% of the needs of our customers. The other 95, 96% is transportation, it's labor, it's other things that they need to do to get things from point A to point B. And we're not playing in that area, in the big opportunity. So we examined pieces of that opportunity set and figured out where do we have a competitive advantage and where do we have a right to play. For example, should we be in the labor business? Should we be in the energy business? Because that's such an important part of the supply chain. And as we tried to introduce strategies to get into those businesses, we had some resistance from our team because they were saying, you know, we joined the company to be real estate people and make deals. What are we dealing with, you know, solar and energy and renewables and all that kind of stuff? But, you know, I've learned that if you explain the why to people and you've got bright people in your organization, not only they'll sign on, but they'll figure out better ways of getting to that destination than you would have ever. So clarity of vision and making things that are chaotic more understandable, particularly the whys. You don't have to worry about so much the hows. The hows are important, but people can help you figure out the how.
I want to pick up on something you were just saying, Fred, about your team, because so many CEOs I interview talk about the importance of the culture. And I know that you have operations all around the world, so in some ways you're a multicultural, but how do you create a strong, unified culture that shares your values on innovation and to get everybody on board together? How do you build that culture? Because that seems to be so crucial to success.
Well, 100% in the service industry. I mean, you know, when you make things, it's usually a process and you improve it. But in any service industry, the difference between the very best job that a frontline team member can give and the minimum amount of effort to keep from getting fired is pretty wide. So the military's known that forever, since the beginnings of time. And athletics, we've all seen the lesser team come out and beat the number one team. It's withdrawing that discretionary effort. So you have to have a culture that rewards discretionary effort, and we have been building that for over 50 years in lots of different ways. Just for one example, most of the time in business, you're looking for, people are looking for, to catch somebody doing something wrong. In our culture, in FedEx, we try to catch somebody doing something right, and when we do, we reward them. We have a little program, it's from the Naval Service, and I think it started in the Royal Navy, actually. But when you do something well, the Commodore or the Admiral, he runs up 2 flags, BZ, Bravo Zulu. It means well done and thank you. So everybody wants a BZ. Well, we've had a BZ program at FedEx forever. So if you catch somebody doing something good, you can give them a BZ, $150 to go out to dinner, you know, promote them, whatever the case may be. So if you ask anybody in FedEx, it's about the BZ program. We want to pull that discretionary effort out of people so they will do the best job they can do. The second thing is you have to have a lingua franca. So if you go to FedEx in Singapore or Sioux City, they'll be talking the same language, quality-driven management. That's our Six Sigma, our mathematical quality program. And you'll hear the word over and over again, I'm going to keep the purple promise. That's our color, purple, orange, and white. The purple promise is very simple. I will make every FedEx experience outstanding. It makes a difference if you're an aircraft mechanic working on a 777 or the person that operates the loader. I'm going to try to make his or your job easier by keeping the purple promise. So we just pound away at those, and we reward it and recognize it over and over again. Most people in the service business, they don't understand how valuable that discretionary effort is. And we were talking about an institution in the green room, which has very low discretionary effort, and you can see it. And in FedEx, I hope we've been able to do that. And one final thing, Susie, that's I think very important. We operate in 220 countries around the world. We have over 500,000 people in our system. And we have every ethnicity, every possible type of human being on the planet that's on the FedEx team. But the similarities are much greater than the differences. And when you work on those similarities, treating people fairly, where do I go to get justice? How do I get ahead? You answer those questions, which have been well known by the sociologists for a long time. So it's not that people don't know how to do this, it's just hard to do. And a lot of times it's against your own self-interest to do it. I mean, if it's 50 degrees below zero on our ramps in Chicago, we expect our managers to be on the ramp, not sitting in the warming hut having coffee while the ground crew is loading those 777s on their way to Asia or Europe. So it's hard business, but you have to work those cultural issues if you want that discretionary effort.
You told me many years ago when I was interviewing you that I said, how did you learn leadership? You said from the Marines. And now every example you've given has that discipline to it. So bravo to you that you've kept that going for 50 years. Hamid, how about you? I mean, talk to us about culture, Prologis.
You know, I wasn't in the Marines, but I learned most of the lessons about leadership in kindergarten, which is the other place you learn it. But it's interesting, in your first couple of questions, you brought up two of the three big ideas about how Prologis works. We have three things that we really value. I mentioned the first one, which is customer centricity, which is unusual in our industry. The third thing is culture. And I will maintain that culture is the only form of sustainable competitive advantage. People will copy your product. People will copy your processes. People will copy your designs. But building a strong culture is really, really difficult. And if it weren't, a lot more people would do it. By the way, the third thing is being open to change and innovation. So they all start with C's, so they're easy to remember. But back to culture. I think a lot of people confuse values and culture. Values are things that don't change. These are the things we stand for. And culture is just a way of operationalizing those values, making those values from aspirational objectives to something that you can apply every day. And one of the really important functions of culture, a strong culture, is that it attracts the right people that share those views to your organization. And actually, to build on something that Fred said, it repels people very easily that don't believe in those elements. But culture doesn't mean that our people in Tokyo are going to behave the same way as our people in Italy. They're different. They're different cultures and all that. But they share those values, and they've operationalized them in terms of their culture that's shared across the company.
I want to pick up on your customer centricity, because that's what you always talk about, meeting your customers' needs and listening to what they want. And in fact, in these few days that you've been in London, I understand that you've been going and making customer calls, including this morning. So you really live by that belief. Tell us how you're seeing the customer expectations evolving, and how does Prologis stay ahead to meet those expectations?
Well, customers are under enormous pressure to meet the needs of their customers. And they generally, really well-run companies develop one or two or three competencies that they're really, really good at, and that's the core of their business. And oftentimes, those competencies are not logistics, real estate. So our job is to bring that expertise and that skill set to our customers and make their job easier. We want to be the easy button. So, and a lot of people think that you got to be cheaper, faster, better. You got to be all those other things, but you got to make it easy for the customer, because in a very competitive world, those customers want to focus on what they do best. And they're quite open to leaving the rest to you if they believe that you have the scale and the ability to deliver those services.
I like that easy button thing because that's definitely what we think of when we think of FedEx, you know, talking about how customers have changed. When you started your company, Federal Express, people were just happy to get their packages faster than the U.S. Postal Service. I mean, that was great. Now with e-commerce and everything else that's going on, you want your package the same day or in the next few hours. So how have you adapted to your customer expectations?
Well, like most large businesses, and FedEx is a big business. I mean, it's $90 billion now. That's just the size and scope. A lot of people don't know this. We operate 700 planes, 215,000 vehicles. We operate 5,000 facilities, 220 countries around the world. And every day we have a referendum on the economy. We're moving about 15 million things. And we're moving packs for e-commerce. Yesterday, I was over at Heathrow and looking at all of our operations there that are moving pallets for industry, and a few more, by the way, because of the port strike as of yesterday, I have to say. Or e-commerce packs going to some consumer in Omaha, Nebraska. So the main thing in all businesses that I've been on, and I've been on 5 other New York Stock Exchange boards, and all of them have the same issues. You've got to deepen and you've got to broaden if you want to grow. And the trick is not to get outside your core competencies. So if you go one, if you go one notch over, so you've got to stay in those areas, but deepen and broaden the product line. And I think that understanding those at the most granular level, as Ham was talking about, and the customers, and oftentimes you have to know what the customer wants before the customer knows they want it, and you've got to take a flyer. I'll give you 2 very quick examples. First of all, we invented the ability to track and trace packages. It was never done before. It had profound implications for the logistics business, by the way. Because once we invented that, we could show inventory whether it was in motion or in a Prologis warehouse. That changed everything. It had never been done in human history. We actually did it because we wanted to manage, you know, by mathematics, not by anecdote or audit. But once we did it, we were shocked that our customers were just enraptured with this because it was so profound to them. So at one time, we were the largest purchasers of PCs in the world. And we would buy these personal computers and put them in our shipping room. It changed everything. It also made us have to broaden our product line. Because now if people could see inventory at motion and at rest, they didn't necessarily have to send it 500 miles an hour as a safety stock. They could, discreetly decide, well, I can move this slower at a lower cost, and this one I've really got to move. So it changed everything completely. More recently, in the e-commerce world, one of the biggest problems is residential delivery. That changed everything. It's been a huge transformation at FedEx over the last decade. You go mostly from B to B to B to C. Well, what really irritates people that are getting residential deliveries is you didn't deliver the package. So we started putting GPS tracks so we could track everything. And then we decided, no, that's not good enough. So today, if you get an e-commerce package through FedEx, Walmart, Target, Home Depot, Lowe's, Boohoo, Farfetch, wherever it's coming from, we send you a picture. So if we didn't deliver your package, oh, well, there's
I
the
love
picture.
that.
We're right at your front door at 10:12. So those are examples of
they're great.
understanding your customers, and our customers didn't ask us for either one of those. We just figured out that they probably would like it, and then we exploited it.
And you've been right. Let's talk about AI, because I'm just wondering how you two are using those. I mean, first of all, both of you told me that before it was even called artificial intelligence or AI, and before it was a cool thing to do, you were already using this new technology. How do you see the role of AI transforming your businesses? And over the next 5 years, let's say, with the supply chain? And are there any specific AI solutions that you already are seeing and you say, these are great and are going to make a big difference? Hamid?
Yeah, I think we talked about this earlier. We divide sort of the applications of AI into 3 buckets. One is making things that we already do using other things more efficiently. In our business, that's not a very important application. In some businesses that are operationally intensive, that's a very, very important thing. Our business is about capital allocation. Where do we put our capital and how do we invest? So applications of AI that help us be better allocators of capital. Where's that piece of ground that Fred's going to want to be on, 3 years from now? How do we get there? How do we identify that? How does the productivity of our various locations relate to the attributes of that location? So AI is very good at helping you figure that stuff out. But the most important thing before you ever talk about AI in all our companies is data and digitalizing data. Because if you don't have data, no amount of AI can do you anything, can help you in any way. Sure, there are generalized models and all that AI that everybody else has, but that's not where the prize is. The prize is, with scale, you have access to data about your customers and their needs that puts you in a much better position to serve them. So most people skip that first step, and I think we're spending the vast majority of our time on that first step. Real estate has not been a data-intensive business. They built their business around data. I mean, the fact that you know where that package is not only gives you comfort that it's on its way to you, but can you imagine how many phone calls it avoids of trying to figure out where their stuff is? So by giving the customer something that they didn't even know what they wanted. I bet you didn't have a customer that came to you and said, Fred, please tell me where my package is. I'm sure Steve Jobs did not sit around and ask his customers, well, would you like this thing that you can make phone calls on and take pictures on and make your travel bookings on and all that? So many ideas come from customers, but many other ideas come from companies and they put it out there. And most of those ideas that come from companies don't actually work, but some do, and those are brilliant.
And well, to what extent, though, obviously you are reading ahead of what your customers want. Okay, now you've got this fantastic artificial intelligence tool. What are you guys cooking up over at FedEx and what you're going to do with AI? And have you already started using it?
Well, we're using, what is now commonly called AI, but predicted analytics for a long time. Mm-hmm. In fact, all of the publicity about AI at FedEx, we're always talking about it. It's a little bit like that country and western song, I was country before country was cool. Well, we use an AI for all kinds of things. Just one anecdote that comes to mind. We had somebody from the financial sector, I mean, quite full of themselves, and was convinced that they knew a lot more about a lot of things than FedEx knew. And so this guy said, talked to the head of our digital thing, and said, well, tell me where all the dogs are in the United States. And so our guy then says, big dogs or little dogs? Because we know where every big dog is and we know where every little dog is, because we deliver all kinds of e-commerce dog food and this, that, and the other thing. And then we could further dissect that into whether the owner was male or female just on the data that we have. So our data is so useful to our customers that in many cases, we were talking at dinner last night, you almost can't see where our data and digital interface begins and ends, and theirs does. So we'll have, in the healthcare sector, we'll have people moving very, very important medicines. During COVID, by the way, FedEx moved almost 55% of every one of them, and we delivered at 99.8%. And most of the time, that 2%, 0.2%, it's we couldn't get in because of the weather. So we've used AI increasingly to be able to tell our mission critical customers, particularly in the healthcare, you don't want to send this isotope, or you don't want to send this defibrillator for the operation, today, or we have to move it because there's snow there. And so we're able to manage either the most simple things for consumers, or we can manage the most sophisticated thing. And a final one, I'll give you an example, which is going to change everything. So as I mentioned, we serve 220 countries around the world. Every country in the world has their own customs regime. So the exact same thing may be called one thing by His Majesty's Customs here in the UK, and something quite different in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia or in Singapore or the United States. So being able to use AI to translate, if you will, between this cacophony of trade. And I'm amused sometimes, and it's very timely today because all over the news is the port strike. And shipping in containers is hugely important. And Malcolm McLean was a great friend of mine. He was a wonderful man who invented the container shipping. It's very, very important. But the movement of goods by air, it's only 1% of the tons moved in world commerce. It's almost 40% of the value. It's all of the high-tech, high-value-added stuff. It's the parts and pieces that keep the factories going, the hospitals operating, whatever the case may be. So that type of information for these mission-critical parts of our business, and the ability to clear borders to the satisfaction of the sovereign, and at the same time be efficient for us and our customers, AI, for the first time in history, is going to be able to let us do that, and we're well along that journey now.
You've talked a couple of times about that you work in 220 countries, and I know that Prologis is also very international. So I want to talk to you about a topic that's very much in the news these days, deglobalization. We have political people, we've got a lot of CEOs who are talking about nearshoring, onshoring, they're reconsidering their supply chains. I want to hear from both of you about the opportunities this brings, but also the challenges.
Well, first of all, if you go to our operations, and as soon as I get through here, I'm going to Stansted and visit our operations there, and you see what's going on, and you contrast it with what the politicians are saying, it's preposterous. The politicians are like all, as I refer to them, screenists. Screenists are people whose whole frame of reference comes from the screen. There's no practical knowledge whatsoever. So today, the world in so many sectors is completely integrated because you have an order entry device in your pocket. He's looking at it right now. He could order something over FedEx and we'd deliver it in 2 business days. Literally, he could order anything in the world. So the image the politicians want to project is, I want the lads to go back making steel in Ohio. That's J.D. Vance's view of things, or President Trump. The reality is that manufacturing employment in the United States peaked in 1979, and the United States manufacturing employment has been reduced far more by automation than it has been by the emergence of China. And it's going to be influenced a lot more in the next 5 to 10 years by automation and robotics. I mean, some of the stuff that we're now employing in the FedEx business are astounding. So in parts of the world, they're going to require nearshoring. But what's going on in the supply chains, if you wanted to have a very simple explanation, it's China +1. China's about 21% of the world's manufacturing capability. Everybody is afraid of disruptions. They're afraid of the U.S. and Western Europe contention in China. So you're going to see a lot of production move to Eastern Europe, Mexico, things of that nature. But for the high-tech and high-value service, deglobalization is a myth.
All right, and I saw you shaking your head as he was saying all of that. So are you thinking you can't turn the clock back? You cannot disconnect from an already interconnected world that we've gotten used to, globalization?
Well, I'd like to know how you can. I mean, we have 4% unemployment rate. where are all these people that are going to work in manufacturing, building all this stuff going to come from? There are critical areas like chips and some kinds of pharma and all that, that for sure government policies directing investment into manufacturing in the US because of they're of national interest. But to make toys or shirts or T-shirts or shoes or whatever, I mean, that's not where we want our labor to go anyway. So we want that to come from somewhere else. If you look at even the numbers of trade between China and the United States, which is where the hot conflict is, they haven't really dropped since this talk started. They're actually at the same level as they were 5-6 years ago when globalization was the rage. So again, I totally believe in this disconnect between what politicians talk about and the numbers.
But there's so much momentum on this. I mean, and I'm surprised how many CEOs are saying that they're in favor of this. So, I mean, what do you see as the financial and economic impact if such a thing does happen?
Well, Mexico is going to do really well. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that if you share a big, long border with the world's largest economy, and you have 120 million people that are underemployed, that they can be very helpful to you. So that's a great opportunity for Mexico, great opportunity for the US. So I believe nearshoring is very real. I think China +1 is very real. But I think this notion of manufacturing coming back to Ohio, with what labor? It's crazy.
Financial impact, the economic consequences, if somehow, whether it's through politicians or business people, that we deglobalize?
Well, as I said, I could talk about, my ability to levitate here, but it would be preposterous because gravity's got me stuck. So you said some CEOs are in favor of this. I watched a very famous finance sector CEO that supports President Trump and his tariff regime and so forth. And by the way, I've spoken to President Trump about this, very vociferously.
Well, he's a big advocate.
Well, I haven't been able to move him, but he says imports are deficits or losses and exports are profits. But I've pointed out to him, and he's very kind. I mean, he's actually a very nice fellow one-on-one, and I point out to him when the check clears, if you bought an Airbus, you still own the Airbus when it's through. That's an asset. That's not a loss. Or if you consume a Shein, blouse, and I think my granddaughter's about half of Shein's customer base, as a matter of fact, but you still have the blouse when you clear it. Now, if you want to put a tariff on there, a tariff is a tax, period.
Yep.
If you look in the dictionary or Google it up, it's a tax. Now, you can argue whether it's paid by the consumer or paid by the producer, but it's a sales tax. So the United States now, which people don't understand, is the 4th largest social democracy in the world. Only Greece, Italy, and France have more direct payments to individuals than we do. And I would commend Senator Phil Graham's book to you of the fall of 2022, The Myth of American Inequality. And the number of people that we have now sitting at home, and we just had Nicholas Eberstadt, who I think is the best demographer in the United States. He's with AEI. Look up his work. He first flagged this in his book called Men Without Work in 2016. We have 7 million men in the United States sitting home doing nothing. And our lowest 20 percentile of the United States gets only 16% of their income from wages, from their earnings. 84% are government transfer payments. So unless you are going to go backwards in that regard, and it came from Europe, by the way, that was the model. You're not going to reindustrialize and have lads and ladies making garments in the United States of America. It's just not going to happen. So it doesn't make any difference whether anybody that says that's going to happen. Commerce is like water. If it hits a rock, it's going to go around. You mentioned Mexico. We have a huge business in Mexico. We have a Mexican CEO on the FedEx board because of this change. There are 1,000 industrial plots in Mexico for factories or supply chain facilities. Not all of them occupied. 30% of them are owned by Chinese.
Interesting.
So the people in China, we have a habit of saying, well, China is President Xi, and he is a hugely important man in the Communist Party. But there are hundreds of millions of people in China, and a lot of business people like this audience. They're not insane. So they're doing China plus one, as I said. So I think the unrealistic view that you're going to go backwards in this is simply not possible. Even if you support it philosophically, the market is going to overwhelm you or it's going to impoverish you.
Well, you set things up for us to look a little forward instead of looking backward. And Hamid, you always say that it's your job to see around the corner so that you can prepare your company for the future. So look around the corner to 2025. How do you see the economy shaping up? How do you see the business outlook for your company?
I think the economy is going to be doing reasonably well, unless there is a catastrophe in terms of geopolitical forces. But I think with the central banks being on an easy cycle, I think unemployment rate is ticked up a little bit, but it's still in 4% range. I don't know how you can have a recession with 4% unemployment rate and an easing Fed. So I think we're going to have modest growth. Now, if we start doing crazy things to it, like putting on big tariffs and all that, you asked about what's the economic impact of this deglobalization. Well, if it's going to be accomplished with tariffs, it's going to be highly inflationary, which is going to get us back into a tightening cycle, which is going to be a drag on the economy. So it depends on some policy movements that we make. And this is a very hard time to predict those because we have a binary outcome in either a month and a half or about 5 months. I don't know which one is going to be the answer, but at some point we're going to know who our new president is and what our policies are. And if we continue down this path, we may get a lot of people to vote for us, but I think all those people will be poorer and less employed because of the inflationary effects of interfering with globalization.
What do you think, Fred? When you talk to your board and your leadership team, what are you saying about the business outlook for FedEx, the macroeconomic outlook, 2025?
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to recognize, and this is my view, but it's shared by a lot of people, and I think there's a lot to support it. The only reason the world hadn't had World War III since the end of the Second World War was because the United States in particular and the rest of the world embraced open markets. It was the United States leadership on trade, which began with Roosevelt in 1934, by the way, and Cordell Hull. But after World War II, the United States opened its market and famously put the Marshall Plan in place to reindustrialize Germany in particular and Japan. So if you plot the growth of world GDP, it's directly correlated to the growth in trade between nations. In 2018, it went flat. Well, what happened in 2018? That's when the trade war started. That's when President Trump put the tariffs on, with justification, by the way, because China had become mercantilist. Now, whether they would have done it under any circumstances or they took advantage of the United States' preoccupation with the Middle East or the financial crisis, I don't know, and I was heavily involved in it, but it was a fork in the road. And they decided to move almost towards autarky, where we're going to make everything for ourselves, but we're not going to buy anything from anybody else. So 20 years ago, the ratio of containers going into China versus out was 2 to 1. Now, as Hamid said, it's 3 to 1. It's worse. It's not better. So that's why everybody is going China plus one. They're not saying we're going to get rid of the production in China. Apple couldn't make an iPhone without the China manufacturing infrastructure, but they're trying to do China plus one in India and elsewhere. That's the big story about globalization. But the West, meaning Western Europe and the United States, unless it wants to turn its back on its social the social transfer payments, it's not going to reindustrialize unless robotics allows it to do it.
So
simple as that.
Bring us to 2025. Bring us to 2025. How are you looking to the future for next year in terms of how positive or optimistic or pessimistic are you about the economy?
Well, I don't think there really has been any real GDP growth since 2018. That's the point I was trying to make, because the world went backwards. And so the United States has led the whatever growth there is with our continuous consumer still buying. I mean, if you watch CNBC or Bloomberg, that's all everybody's talking about. How is the consumer going to stand up, and credit card debt is going up, and car delinquencies are going up. Well, the way that's been funded is with debt. The United States has been borrowing $2 trillion a year, $2 trillion a year, and that's a lot. We carry $2 trillion worth of merchandise every year at FedEx. We move 6% of the GDP, but it's a small part of the overall economy, and the overall economy has been fueled by the U.S. government borrowing $2 trillion, and 65% of all the jobs that have been created in the United States have been healthcare, social services, and hospitality. There has not been any growth in business investment or in manufacturing employment, except those areas where the U.S. government, through the Inflation Reduction Act or the American Recovery Plan, has provided subsidies. And I defy you to go find somebody at the London School of Economics or Harvard Business School, go find a professor teaching manufacturing and get the 10 students that want to go out and put a factory up in Leeds or Coventry or someplace. They don't exist. Now they want to go to work for a consultancy or Prologis or hopefully FedEx. But manufacturing of basic items is not going to be reintroduced into the West unless robotics changes the game, and it may well, in fact, I'll go even further and say it will. But in the West, the biggest single industry is finance. It used to be 10% of the profits of American industry 30 years ago. It's now 23% and going further. We have half the publicly held companies in the United States today that we did 30 years ago. There are 28,000 companies around the world that are not listed for sale. They're owned by private equity. So the West, the City of London, Wall Street, it's been finance, and the Magnificent Seven or the Great Eight, they're all tech companies.
Okay.
But the industrial economy has not grown since 2018 and the trade wars began.
I love your strong opinion, and I'm sure everybody gets that.
Strong opinions?
Yeah, strong opinions.
But Susie, they're not my opinions, they're facts.
They're
That's the problem.
That's why they're strong.
That's why we're in trouble, because when you watch on TV, all you get are opinions. You don't get facts.
Well, but I want your opinion on something else. I mean, one of the topics that we have not discussed, I'm sure everybody here in the audience is interested in, is that for 4 weeks away from the U.S. presidential election, and no, I'm not going to ask you who you're going to vote for. I'm not going to ask you who you favor. But I do want to hear from you. You are the CEOs of two huge, successful American companies. What is the single best advice you have for the next president of the United States, whether it's a Democrat in the White House or whether it's Republican? What is your single best advice for the next president?
Well, first of all, one small connection. I'm not the CEO of FedEx. I was smart enough to promote my longtime partner, Raj Subramanian, who's about twice as smart as I am, and 4x digitally more knowledgeable. I'm doing a great job. Well, it's the same thing I've been trying to say today. The populism, whether it's in Eastern Europe or in the U.S. presidential election or in Austria, all of the things that we're watching today. The only reason that we haven't had, and this is opinion, but it's backed on fact, that we haven't had a major war since the end of World War II is the growth in trade. We've taken hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, billions of people out of poverty. So now we're going to turn our back on that and say, we're going to make Austria great again. Let's call it that way, okay? That's MAGA too, right?
So what's your advice to the next president? What would you tell him or her?
To recognize just what I said. It's the embrace of trade. And Cordell Hull said this famously in his memoirs many years ago. When goods cross borders, armies rarely do. And I saw this personally. So I left Asia. You put that ancient photograph on in 1970. I never thought I'd go back to Asia. I got into FedEx. It was built to move the high-tech and high-value-added items of the computer age. Well, by the early 80s, all of the high-tech and high-value-added manufacturers who had been built to serve had moved out of New England, which is where they were, and they moved to Asia. The last major war in Asia was 1979, and the Chinese thought they were going to teach the North Vietnamese army a lesson. They're the best army in modern times. The North Vietnamese defeated them soundly. That's the last war in Asia. What happened? They started trading with one another. We made them rich because of world trade. So this is very dangerous, and it's at its heart what caused a big part of the 1930s travesty and the growth of these isms in those periods of time. So my advice to the President of the United States, whoever that may be, is recognize the reality of just what I've said. And you're not going to roll back, and if you try to roll it back, there's a lot of danger because people will react poorly. And again, the last war in Asia, tens of millions of people killed in Asia from the start of the 20th century through 1979. You can track it directly. It's the growth of trade that kept the peace.
Okay, got that message. Hamid, you get last word. Your advice to the next president.
Be the president for all Americans and not just 50% of Americans.
You want to add more to that?
Well, you know, I think the biggest problem facing us is the extreme divisiveness of the country and this ideology that we're all wedded to, and you know, lots has been written about that. If you want slightly more practical input, I believe that the laws of economics have not been suspended, so running 8% deficits of the federal budget is not sustainable. Okay, so stop doing that. Handing out free money to people to buy votes is not a sustainable strategy. And number two, you cannot tariff your way to prosperity. You just can't. And that's another way of saying what Fred said.
Well, this has been an excellent conversation. You've given us lots to think about. Fred Smith, Hamid Moghadam, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Just one second. Tracy, let me hand it off to you.
Hamid, Fred, and Susie, thank you so much for your insightful conversation and the extraordinary performance. It's really incredible how the supply chain has evolved over the course of the last 40 and 50 years. So thank you both for your vision, your leadership, and insights into the world of fulfillment.
Thank you.